Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why drivers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Some of the most damaging relationships are the hardest ones to explain, and they don't have to look extreme in order to be deeply harmful. Welcome to the Covert Narcissism Podcast, where we make sense of what never quite made sense. If you've been listening for a while, you may already understand what's happening in your relationship. You can see the patterns, you can name the behaviors, but maybe you still feel stuck in the same cycle. This is where coaching comes in. It's not about learning more, it's about having the support to finally apply what you already know and begin moving forward. You need a coach. If you're ready for that next step, I invite you to join me in my coaching program. You can learn more about it at covertnarcissism.com. I recently received a message from one of my listeners. She's in her lower 50s and she filed for divorce about a year ago. Her husband finally moved out recently, and she's navigating this journey with two teenage daughters, 13 and 15. So she explains to me that they're sharing custody now, 4 nights with her and 3 nights with him. And she said something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She said that her ex presents as the nice, generous guy, as so many of them do. His solution to any feeling that his daughters bring to him is to buy them something and then to gaslight them. No repair ever, which is very familiar to most of us. 0 boundaries. And then she said it this way: his crown is on, and no one can ever penetrate his self-defense system. If you heard last week's episode titled The Covert Narcissist Mask, then you know exactly what she means by crown. That protective structure that some people build. Instead of ever letting anyone see what's inside them, you get hit by this crown, or otherwise known as a mask. You don't find genuineness, honesty, and vulnerability, but rather fakeness, blame shifting, defensiveness. So today, I want to give you something practical, not just to understand what our kids are dealing with, but specific tools to help them learn to navigate their way through this, to learn to trust themselves again, even in a house where that trust gets undermined 3 nights a week. Now, I want to be honest with you. When I first read her email, my instinct was to write back with an attempt at specific talking points. Here's what to say, and here's the language to use. But I paused because it's just not that easy. And the more I sat with it, the more I realized that the real answer isn't a script for one conversation with your child. It's a whole different way of thinking about what we're actually building in our kids. So that's what this episode is about. With a covert narcissist, this is a different kind of co-parenting problem, and I'm sure many of you are already aware of that. Most co-parenting advice out there assumes that both parents are operating in good faith, that they both have the kid's best interest at heart. It assumes that if communication breaks down, the fix is better communication, and boy, that's a laugh. They suggest things like a shared calendar and a script for handling conflict, an agreement to always present a united front. Now, this situation does actually exist, and this advice is actually helpful, just not for us. This is 2 reasonably regulated adults who both want what's best for the kids, but maybe they couldn't make their own relationship work, and for them, this advice makes sense. It does not make sense when one parent's pattern is taking no emotional responsibility, and I mean 0, and never bringing or allowing repair ever. So if you've been following the generic playbook and feeling like it's not working, or worse, like it's making things harder for your kids, that's not you failing at co parenting. That's you trying to apply a tool to a situation that it wasn't built for. That's like using a hammer when you're trying to screw in a screw. You cannot co regulate and thus co parent with someone who experiences your feelings or even your child's feelings as an attack on their own self image. You cannot build a unified front with someone whose entire structure depends on never being wrong. Picture this version. A well meaning therapist or a friend or family member, they tell you to keep the peace. Or they tell you to have your daughter tell her dad directly how his comment made her feel so that they can work it out together. Now, how in the world does that usually go when you're dealing with a covert narcissist? She does. Maybe she opens up and tells dad or mom, it could easily be, how she feels, and she gets met with that same defensiveness that you bucked up against for so many years. She gets told that the whole situation is her fault, just like what you've been through. Or maybe that parent does apologize, with their words, but then buys something on the way home, and by dinner, it's like it never happened, except it happens again the very next day. Maybe in some slightly different form, but the pattern just continues. Well, now your child has learned a couple of things. She's learned that speaking up does not lead to repair or real change. And she's learned that she is better off keeping her mouth shut and just internalizing everything. Well, that's the cost of this generic advice here. It's not neutral and no harm, no foul. No, I don't want to hear that it's good advice even though it doesn't work. I don't care. It is actually doing harm. It can actively teach a kid to distrust their own thoughts and feelings and to dismiss their own read of a situation, which is the opposite of what we're going for here. So I want to offer you a different goal. You're not trying to fix the co-parenting relationship, not the one between you and the co-parent, and not the one between that co-parent and your child. That's just not available to you right now, and possibly not ever. What is available to you is this: building your child's internal compass strong enough that they don't need that parent to change in order for them to be okay. Now, listen to what I'm saying here. Helping your kids get to the point that they don't need that parent to change in order for them to be strong and healthy and regulated. Everything that I'm about to walk you through is in service of that one goal. Now, I think it can feel almost counterintuitive to let go of trying to fix the co-parenting piece, and I get that. So much inside of us wants to keep pushing on that door. One more conversation, one more attempt at getting them to see their kid, one more mediator. I understand that instinct. But every hour you spend trying to make them different, and we've already seen how that goes, is another hour that you're not spending building the thing that's actually within your reach. Your kid's relationship with their own internal signals. That's not resignation. It's redirecting your energy to where it can actually land. Now, I want to teach you a concept that I think is going to reframe this whole thing for you. And it's something that you can teach your kids starting tonight if you want. I want you to think about how you taught your kids about eating when they were younger. At some point, you taught them to start to notice when they're hungry. I'm talking about the early signals, the light stomach growl, feeling slightly cranky or even weak before it turns into a full meltdown, can't think straight, everyone is the enemy, hangry mode. And yes, I did say hangry. I had to learn that word a few years ago and had to look it up to see what it meant. It's when you are so hungry that you have reached the point of being angry. And they call that now being hangry. I raised two boys with very high energy levels. I knew what hangry was, even though I didn't have a word for it back then. Their bodies burned through food like crazy. Snack time was crucial for my sanity and theirs. I remember one time a friend of mine was keeping the kids and she called me and said, I don't know what's wrong with him. And she was talking about one of my boys. He's just cranky about everything. He won't cooperate with anything. And it's like he's a different kid. Well, I simply asked, has he had anything to eat in the last, maybe couple hours? Have you fed him? And she said, oh, I didn't think of that. Well, she fed him, and my sweet boy was back, and I knew he would be because I had been through this many times already myself. So, as my boys were getting older, it became crucial to teach them to get a snack when they were hungry. We can't always be there to feed our kids as they get older, nor should we be. It is important that we teach them to notice the early signals that their body is giving them and to do something about it before it gets bad. Their future relationships will appreciate them learning this. Every parent does this or should do this, and nobody's going to question that. It's just good parenting. It's teaching them, in fact, something bigger than eat a snack. It's teaching them that their body sends real information, and it's their job to notice it and respond to it. Think about that lesson for a minute here. Teaching them that their body is sending them real information and that it's their job to notice it and respond to it. Were you taught to listen to your body? Maybe when it comes to food, okay, but maybe not even that. But what about when it comes to feelings? Were you taught to listen to your body? Emotional signals work exactly the same way as our hunger signals. A feeling starts to build in the body, a tight chest, a stomach that drops, a jaw that clenches, shoulders creeping up towards the ears. Well, that's the same kind of early warning system as hunger. It's the body saying, hey, something here needs your attention. The skill set is identical. Notice early, respond early and appropriately. Don't wait for the emotional equivalent of hangry, the meltdown, the shutdown, the panic attack, the blow up that seems to come out of nowhere. Here's the problem for kids that are growing up around covert narcissism. They are taught, not usually in words, not always in words at least, but in patterns over and over. They are taught to ignore their internal signals. Think about what would happen to a kid who is told, you're not really hungry, you just ate 2 hours ago. If they are told that enough times, eventually they stop trusting their own hunger cues. They stop listening to their body. They start looking outside themselves to know what's true about their own body, for someone to tell them that it's time to eat and not their own system. Well, the exact same thing happens with feelings. A kid who hears, you're overreacting, or that's not what happened, or gets handed a new pair of sneakers instead of an apology. When that happens enough times, that kid stops trusting their own emotional signals. Now, the signals don't go away. They don't turn off just because they're being ignored. They just stop being heard. And then they build inside, and they build quietly until it comes out sideways as anxiety or disassociation, panic attacks, blow-ups that look disproportionate to whatever small thing just triggered it. But it's actually years of unheard signals finally refusing to be ignored anymore. So here's a reframe that you can start giving your kids. Your feelings are like your hunger. They don't need anyone's permission to show up. They just do. They're not asking to be approved of. Your job, and it's a job you can learn, is to notice them and to take care of them, whether or not the other person in the room thinks that they're valid. These are your feelings, and they matter. Put this concept for your kids into your own words. These kids of yours are connected to your heart. Let your heart guide you on this path. You might even ask them some questions to make the analogy really stick. Ask them things like, do you remember what it used to feel like right before you got hangry? Or maybe, how about the other day when that just happened? Before you even knew what was happening, do you remember those feelings? What did it feel like in your body? Let them describe that to you in their own words. And then ask them, do you ever notice something similar happen inside of you right before you get really upset or really shut down? You're not lecturing here. You're helping them to build a personal dictionary for their own signals in a language that's theirs, not yours and not mine. Now let's connect this back to the concept of the mask or the crown. Some people, instead of developing the capacity to say, I was wrong, I hurt you, here's what I will do differently, they build a crown instead, or otherwise known as a mask. It's a protective structure that sits over something very raw underneath, something that was never safe enough early enough for a real self to form. Now, I'm not saying this to generate sympathy that excuses the harm. No, I'm saying it because understanding the mechanism helps your kid to stop taking it personally. The crown or the mask isn't about them. It's about that other parent, and it was built long before your child existed. What I want your kids to learn to notice is not, is my dad a narcissist or my mom a narcissist? That's not a useful question for a 13 or 15-year-old to be chasing. The useful question is actually much simpler. Did repair happen or didn't it? Repair is not a monetary gift. It's not, let's talk about this and then go get some ice cream. Repair sounds like, I hear that I hurt you. I am sorry. Here's what I will do differently. That's it. That's the whole formula for repair. And when kids learn to listen for that formula specifically, they stop being confused by generosity that isn't actually repair. A new phone does not erase a broken promise. A trip to the mall doesn't erase being told their feelings weren't real. Now, this ties directly back to the body signal we just talked about. You can teach your kids to do a body check after an interaction has happened. Teach them to consider things like, did that conversation actually resolve that tight chest feeling that they had? Or did it just get papered over with something shiny? Their body will know before their brain fully articulates it. The goal here is to help them connect with those feelings in their body and to trust them. Now, I know practical tools are useful, and it's what a lot of us need. So here are 4 practical tools on this journey. First is that body check that I just mentioned. Before your kid tries to figure out who's right or whose fault anything is, before they get pulled into arguing their case, defending their perception, or trying to win the reality contest, teach them to pause and ask one question. What am I feeling in my body right now? Not what's the right response, not how do I prove this happened, just what is my body telling me? That's the anchor. Everything else comes after that. Second, they need to see the parent's narrative for what it is. It's a narrative about the parent. When your child is saying, Dad says I'm overreacting, that's a sentence about Dad. It's about him. Dad says I'm overreacting is about Dad. It's not data about the child. Teach your child to hold that as a separate piece of information. And it's about the parent. Separating the parent's reaction from their own internal read, instead of letting the parent's reaction automatically override theirs by default, may be the single most protective habit of mind that you can give a kid in this situation. Third, journaling as an evidence trail. This one is powerful over time, especially with a custody schedule that has them moving back and forth. A simple format for the journaling. What happened, what I felt in my body, and what I felt emotionally. Nothing fancy. The point isn't to build a legal case here. It's to build their own trust in their own pattern recognition. 6 months of entries starts to show them something that no single conversation ever could. A consistent shape to what's actually happening. And it's in their own handwriting, in their own words, immune to being talked out of it in the moment. Fourth is a self-validating phrase for those moments themselves. Something short enough to actually use when they are standing in a hallway feeling dismissed. Something like, my feelings don't need his or her permission to be real. Let your child pick their own version of this. If this exact wording doesn't fit them, that's fine. The point is that they have something ready so that they are not scrambling for words. And these are words inside of them, words they are saying to themselves, but words they can use in the middle of being gaslit. These 4 tools work together. Notice the signal, separate the parent's narrative from their own data, track the pattern over time, and have language ready for in the moment. That's the whole toolkit, and it's teachable to a teenager in one conversation. Though, like anything else, it might take some repetition to become automatic. Notice this isn't about fixing the relationship between the child and the narcissistic parent. There's not a toolkit for that yet, maybe someday. This is about developing your child's relationship with themselves and helping them to separate their parents' opinions from who they actually are. I'll give you one more piece of advice here, especially for those that are making those transitions. This is about the transition points between houses. Before a custody switch, ask your child one simple question. Say to them, what's one thing your body wants me to know before you go? Not, how are you feeling about going to dad's or mom's? That can feel very loaded, like you're fishing for something to be upset about, and kids do pick up on that instantly. The body-focused version, it's lower pressure. It gives them a quick way to check in with themselves before the transition, and it gives you a read on where they are without turning it into an interrogation about the other parent. I want to pause here and voice something. It is so tempting when you can finally see the patterns clearly and your kids are still living inside it 3 nights a week, to want to name it for them. You want to say to them, your dad is a narcissist or your mom is a narcissist. You want to explain the whole framework to make sure they understand what they're dealing with. I would ask you not to do that. Not because you're wrong about what you're seeing, but bad-mouthing the other parent, even when it's accurate, tends to backfire. It can look like alienation, even when your intent is protection, and that can be used against you. And it puts your kids in a loyalty bind that they didn't ask for, and they certainly don't need in the midst of this. Because now they would have to manage your feelings about their dad or mom on top of managing their own. Over time, this can build resentment towards you. The move instead is to validate what they are feeling. Not hand them a diagnosis. Say things like, that sounds confusing, or that sounds like it really hurt, and then a full stop. You don't need to add, because he's a narcissist or because she's gaslighting you. This doesn't help the validation to land. In fact, it lands better without it, because now the feeling is the point, not the label. Here's the thing I've seen over and over, both in my own life and in the people I work with. Kids usually arrive at the awareness themselves. Often later, once they've had enough contrast. I want to talk about this for a minute. Enough experience with people who do repair. Be one of those people in their lives. Enough experience with people who don't gaslight, who don't wear a crown or a mask. That contrast is what helps them to start getting their eyes open, because now they can look and see the pattern clearly on their own. That realization, when it's theirs, is so much more durable than anything you could have told them at 13 or 15. Your job right now, it's not to convince them of anything. It's to keep their internal compass working so well that the truth becomes obvious to them in its own time. Your job is to be the safe place where their signal gets confirmed, not the place where a new narrative gets installed. Those are very different roles, even though from the outside they can look similar. One says, I trust what you're telling me about how you feel. and the other says, let me tell you what's really going on. The first builds their compass. The second, it just replaces one authority figure's version of reality with another, yours instead of the other parent's. And that's not what our kids need. It took most of us a long time to work through the confusion of this relationship. Most of us didn't grow up learning to listen to our bodies. No, we grew up learning to override them, to talk ourselves out of what we were feeling, to wait for someone else to tell us whether our reaction was reasonable or not. In fact, a lot of us might still be working on this. So if teaching your kids to trust their nervous system feels unfamiliar to you, even a little unpracticed, that does make sense. You're teaching a language that you're still becoming fluent in yourself. But that's exactly what makes this such a beautiful gift to them. Our kids today have the chance to learn from these young ages a language that many of us did not get handed until much later. You don't have to have it fully figured out yourself in order to start teaching it. You just need to be maybe a few steps in front of them and then be willing to learn it alongside them. They don't need their mother's or father's permission to know what's real, and you don't need to be finished healing in order to teach them to listen to their own body. I wish you and your kids so much peace on your journey of healing. If you've been listening for a while, you may already understand what's happening in your relationship. You can see the patterns, you can name the behaviors, but maybe you still feel stuck in the same cycle. This is where coaching comes in. It's not about learning more. It's about having the support to finally apply what you already know and begin to move forward. If you're ready for that next step, I invite you to join me in my coaching program. You can learn more about it at covertnarcissism.com. Your story matters, and you deserve to be heard without judgment. Check out my coaching services at my website, again, covertnarcissism.com. And don't forget to subscribe, to thumbs up, to follow, to like this podcast so that you can get more empowering episodes like this one and to help us continue spreading the word so that our community can continue to grow. I wish you so much peace on your journey of healing. The information provided by Renee Swanson, Covert Narcissism Podcast, and CNG Life Coaching is for educational purposes only and is not to be used for diagnosis purposes and not intended to be a substitute for clinical care. Please consult a healthcare provider for guidance specific to your case. This material discusses narcissism in general. Renee shares stories from her personal experience as well as from those she has talked with for several years. Her material does not claim that any specific person has narcissism and should not be used to refer to any specific person as having narcissism. Permission is not granted to link to or repost this material to support any allegation or support a claim that any specific person is a narcissist. That would be an unauthorized misuse of this material and information provided.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.